Welcome back to the Mighty Glue Stick, everybody. My name is AJ, and today we're going to be covering Sigil in the Explores series, Mighty Glue Stick Explores. Now, this is going to be slightly different from my usual monster ecology videos, which I'll upload on the weekends. The Explores series will be, I'm aiming for a midweek release of each video, but it's going to be sporadic because some of the topics that I cover are going to be very in-depth and require a bit of research. Sigil, the City of Doors, is one such place. It will be our home base as we go exploring out across the cosmos. I would like to also concentrate mainly on the world of Tyrell and the continent of Faerun and its interesting places that quite often don't get covered in a lot of other videos in depth, but they really need to be because they are just intricately fascinating. There's about 30 years of history which has gone into all these locations and things, and they've changed during the different editions of the game. Sigil also has changed a lot as it's progressed through the years and different editions of the game, and some people who have skipped over 4th edition, I don't blame you. I hold no grudges, but I was one of the people that really loved 4th edition, and it also brought a lot of my attention to Sigil. And so a lot of people who have skipped from, say, 3.5 or 3rd edition, or were strictly 2nd edition players who have been lured into the clutches of 5th edition, will have a better understanding of Sigil. And but they may have missed quite a lot of stuff and quite a lot of the things which have happened in Sigil over that time. Now, I've got to say right from the outset that I'm going to be very brief in covering the basics of what Sigil is in this first video, just to give you an overview of where it's located, what it is, and what its main themes are, and you'll understand pretty quickly why I can't do an entire overlay of Sigil. I can't get very in-depth in Sigil in one sitting because it's a very, very complex place. So it is a place, and let's go there. So Sigil is located on the concordant planes of the Outlands. This is a connector plane. It's a neutral sort of environment. It's not exactly a prime material plane. It's not exactly an outer plane. It's a bridging plane, similar in a way to, say, a solidified astral sea or an ethereal plane made real. Or it's a place where things come together. It's a concordant plane. It's a central plane. It's a hub. It's a place that is not a place. And it has its own rules, it has its own geography, it has its own locations, lots of very interesting locations. And it can also be a hideaway that people escape to run around and go to different places. So it's, in some ways it's a path from one place to another, and in other ways it's a backwater where people go to escape. And it's also the location of the central spire, at the top of which is the City of Sigil, also known as the City of Doors, or the Cage. And it's an interesting dichotomy there that it's called both the City of Doors and a Cage, but you'll understand why. So the spire that sits at the center of the Outlands was originally part of the world, the Great Axis, the cosmic wheel, where all of the outer planes were on the outside of this central connection of prime material worlds, and then you had the elemental planes and demi-planes, and then on the outside of that you had the aligned planes, so planes that were more about philosophy than they were about physical connection. And the concordant planes of the Outlands was a central hub that connected all of these things. And Sigil is a city that connects infinitely to everything. That's why it's called the City of Doors. So if we look at it from the outside perspective, it's the central hub. It's the location of species of creatures which I cover in my Planner Races video. I'll put a link in the description down below. And these are creatures of neutrality, so quite often content to sit back and watch the universe unfold and events happen, but don't often get involved unless things are swinging violently to or fro towards the good or evil or chaos or law too far for their liking. And then they get involved. And they live in the central spire that reaches all the way up until you see Sigil floating high above. Of course, the spire is technically not infinite. You can see the top of it, but climbing up to the top of it is an almost impossible task because of the weird physics that surrounds the City of Doors. The spire itself doesn't actually touch Sigil. Sigil floats above it and is visible, but it's very, very hard to reach. Even approaching it from the air is quite difficult. Sigil itself has a unique aspect, which is one of its most important features. That is that it is separated from the influence of deities and great powers of the cosmos. Gods have no influence or sway and cannot in fact enter the City of Doors. Why this is largely a mystery, as is the person who's responsible, the being who is responsible for this effect. And there's a lot of mystery around where exactly Sigil came from originally, or what this central figure is, or what its origin was, or the extent of its power. But we do know that for some aspects of the game, there is a greater geography to the multiverse of Dungeons and Dragons, and this is hinted at in some of the more obscure god stuff of Forgotten Realms, where Io, who is the overgod of the deific pantheon of Faerun, or Toril, is answerable to a greater power. So there's an even larger structure of where essentially Io is in charge of a set of realms, a set of material universes, dimensions, prime material dimensions, and there is some greater power which is playing a much greater game, involved in a much greater reality of many, many, many different dimensions, which great overgods have been assigned to as facets of a greater power. So it may in fact be that there is some facet of a greater power acting here, which actually limits gods in their activity in this particular area, almost like a point of exclusion. So it could be an incursion of a greater planar existence, an over dimension which has intruded in the form of a torus into the cosmos of the D&D universe. Anyway, it could be like basically look at it like a black hole which has been made into a structure. There's an event horizon that you can't get across, and the influence of gods and things, their rules break down at its border, and inside it's got a different set of laws which operate, which connect it to all the other places in the cosmos, because there is no distance between them, and it's an over object, so it's everywhere and nowhere at once, if that makes any sense. I hope not. It's quite vague for a reason. But what it basically allows the original designers to do is they were creating, in 1994, they were creating the Planescape adventure. So Planescape setting is a sci-fi sort of a feel to it, and it drew in a lot of the different elements of the fantasy game world at the time and what people really wanted to play. So they drew upon many different influences, including science fiction games, swashbuckling games, games where they had airships, a steampunky feel to it, also a CB radio chatter, Vampire the Masquerade's different factions, and they drew it all together, and they said, we need a central hub from which these adventures can take place, where they can go to all sorts of different planes of existence and deal with fantastical things, but have a home base to go to that makes some sort of a sense. And a moving ship or something really wouldn't make any sense. It could possibly some sort of a roving base, but what they eventually settled on is a location where a splendidly bizarre city exists, a city like no other, and with as much intrigue and interest as they could possibly pack into it. And what they came up with is Sigil. So what is it in its outlook? I've printed off some various resources, and I'll put links to the stuff down below so that you can actually read along and delve further into it, because I'm just going to touch on the Chapter 1 at a glance. Sigil is the largest planar metropolis in the planes and one of the most important cities in all of the multiverse. Its location is an impossible location on top of the infinite spire in the centre of the Outlands. The City of Doors is located on the inside face of a large torus, like a donut shape that's been hollowed out, with the city on the inside of the donut. And it floats in the center, and so everything in the city is looking upwards at its... So wherever you are in the City of Doors, on the inside of that torus, you're looking up into more buildings. So the City of Doors stretches above you, which is the series of images which I'm giving you with this impossible geography. No matter where you are, you look up and see nothing more than buildings and goings on. So that's one of the reasons why it's referred to as the cage, because when you're inside the city, you're literally inside the city. It's not a place for the clueless, and the city's occupants are multi-planar entities for the most part, and they regard people who come from prime material worlds who don't have any greater awareness of the outer planes, the clueless, and they are particularly arrogant in their relationship to prime material beings who have come into the cage and who have no understanding of the goings on of the outer planes. So cages, as they're known, are arrogant beyond measure, but they can always get away with it because they're wise in the way of things. They have always got an exit in their back pocket. But visitors shouldn't strut their ears, and they'll do best to find themselves some kind of a guide, also known as a tout. And as I go through this, you'll understand that there's an entire vocabulary of the people who live in Sigil, the cages, and that's called the cant. And the cant is basically slang and nicknames and phrases like CB radio chatter. And so they call adventurers cutters, and they call the prime materials primes or clueless. And they've got various other words for different things that you can scatter into your game to give it an authentic feel. And you'll pick it up as you go along, as you read through the material. So there's also an ideological war going on in the City of Doors. For a long time it was exclusively inside the City of Doors and kind of open, where these factions were the holders of power and the operators of society. But that got clamped down on by the power that be inside of the City of Doors. And it basically got forced outside, so that open activities of these different factions couldn't take place openly in Sigil without being tromped on. And I'll talk about the power in charge of Sigil in a moment. The cage is not like any other place in the multiverse. It's an infinity of portals that link Sigil to everywhere else in the multiverse. Any doorway, window, arch, frame, mirror, box that you open, a hole in the ground, a pothole, a hoop, a sign on a shop wall. All of these places can be a dormant portal waiting for the right link to activate it and send away an unwary soul to the deepest depths of the abyss. But this makes the city vitally important to trade throughout the planes. Here, merchants from everywhere can make the city their meeting place to gather and talk about things, exchange information, sell, distribute their wares, buy, broker peace, create a neutral ground that they can meet on where they're not interfered with by other powers. So, yeah, and also you can find wares from anywhere. So business is conducted between opposing parties. Adventurers can come to launch expeditions into the plains, and unfortunates of the plains can get marooned in the back alleys of the city. So adventurers can learn the way of the cage, even primes, and many of them, of course, learn a harsh lesson, and the cage becomes the place where they die. It's a torus, which is a 5-mile diameter and a 20-mile circumference, at least by the official records. The truth is that the city is mutable, and that the being in charge, known as the Lady of Pain, can change the proportions of Sigil as she sees fit, including its internal geography, mostly internal. So external geography she keeps reasonably stable, otherwise buildings would get a bit weird. But the internal geography of the City of Doors is nearly infinite at her whim. And one of the ways that she manifests this is she can create a maze that she throws unfortunates into as a form of punishment or exclusion. Exile, if you will. So, she's known as the Lady of Pain. She is a mysterious entity. Nobody really knows her origin. She manifests herself as a floating entity that looks like a lady in a geisha robe with an ornate metal mask with blades coming off it, and a serene, expressionless face of this mask that she stares out of, and she's enigmatic. And when she shows up, generally speaking, it's either going to be a warning sign that what you're doing has caught her attention, and her attention is not something that you want. With the merest gaze, she can cast her glance over you, and you get cut to pieces, like a magical effect of blades slicing at you, just from a glance at of the Lady of Pain. She can also, without even a gesture, send you into a nearly infinite maze that will take you a very long time to get out of. And she can also teleport you to other planes of existence. So, yeah, not somebody to be argued with. And considering that this is is godlike power in a place where gods cannot enter, it magnifies her importance even more. She has also at her disposal an army of servants, a local population called the Dabu, and I'll talk about them as well. So, it's notably, there's also a place called the Hive, which has got a mutable sort of structure to it as well. So, despite this large size, 20 miles of surface is a huge city. It feels crowded all the time, very, very crowded, and it's chaotic and quite often quite disorganized, and there's lots of different wards of the city, and the wards' definitions are vague. It's like kind of going from one ethnic area of a city to another, where the clues that you've traveled from one ward to another can be quite subtle, but you'll know when you're in a ward proper by its status, its cleanliness, its structure, things like that. The buildings and architecture of Sigil are chaotic. Everything in the cage has been brought to the cage from other areas of existence. And there is native wildlife, such as a particularly vicious type of vine. The place is constantly quite dank and murky and misty. There's quite often a lot of fog in the City of Doors. So although the splendor of the city stretching up and arcing over above you is quite a wonder to behold on a clear day, it's not often that you'll actually see that, because the cities are so choked with cooking fires and exotic smokes and wafts and vapors, and just the steam coming off open sewers, things like that travel through the place. So it's a close feeling sort of a place, and you'll get the idea that when you're in there, you're choked up by buildings and population and just craziness going on all around you, and all of it thick with intrigue and its own local dialects and things. So there are tiny spaces in buildings that would normally house closets or pantries instead become shops or whole apartments for families. Buildings crowd over each other and even crowd overhead, with some streets cut off from the skies altogether, cut off by buildings with other streets above them, flying overpasses and things with shanties built onto the side, strange gantry travel paths and things like that, just all over the place, and laundry and things scattered everywhere, that sort of thing. People hanging out of doorways up above you and throwing things down on the street below. The city is divided into 6 wards, with each ward divided into various districts and neighbourhoods. They aren't, as I said, delineated by borders or lines, so it's hard for you to really know where you are. The best bet is either asking a local, hiring a guard or a tout, a local guide, or if you can hire a courier. The courier, of course, for a fee, could actually tell you exactly where you need to go. After all, finding people in the cage is their business, and they have a very good reputation for it. So there's the Ladies' Ward. The Ladies' Ward is home to Sigil's most elite and powerful and storied people. It's one of the nicest of Sigil's wards, attracts the most powerful, richest and influential, and the adventurers there can rub elbows with higher-ups, and yeah, there's a lot of stored history and stability to the Ladies' Ward. Of course, it's also intensely protected, so it's one of those gated communities sort of thing. The lower ward is Sigil's beating industrial heart, churning out tools and supplies that make city life possible. This is where the blue-collar workers live, where goods are made, where goods are stored, and where small commerce is pursued. The market, or the Guildhall wards, are where things are sold, bartered and traded in the cage, though it's difficult for even the most savvy natives to tell where one ends and the other sort of begins. And then you have, you've also got various dodgy markets in there as well, slave markets and exotic spices and drugs and things, exotic animals. Trade, traditional differentiation of what is legal and not legal is completely out the window when it comes to Sigil. The Clerk's Ward is the bureaucratic centre of the city. In fact, it's the bureaucratic centre of everything, and where things are documented in triplicate. And this is the best patrolled neighbourhood in all the city, and also the means that anyone who can afford to live there will likely move to this area if they can, which is no easy feat, finding some place to move in there. The Clerk's Ward is the most important and powerful aspect of the day-to-day operations of the city, because it contains all of known information and recorded information, official information of doorways and keys to get through portals to go from place to place. And that's one of the, aside from sheer gold and services and products and exotic goods, the location and the key to get through portals to go from one place to another is the most important currency of Sigil. That's really what it's all about. And it's closely guarded, and of course many people become stranded in the cage because they don't have the means to get this information. In fact, their only way out of the city is really just to stumble through a random portal to who knows where. But that's, generally speaking, not a good idea, if you can imagine. So for all intents and purposes, it's an internal city. It's been around for forever from the perspective of most people. And as such, it's seen the rise and fall of an infinite number of architectural styles. Whole cultures and things that have come through Sigil and left an imprint are now gone. So there's a lot of anachronisms next to very, very modern things. You'll find black powder weapons, you'll find magical items, you'll find futuristic sci-fi things, which are essentially amulets and things which can do spell-like effects. You can portray high technology in Dungeons and Dragons exceedingly easily just using spells. Just treat a technological artifact as though it's a magical artifact. In fact, sometimes it's a lot easier to deal with a technological artifact as a dungeon master, because technological artifacts can't be recharged as easily as magical items can. They don't have the universal currency of a magical energy to sustain them. They have exotic energy sources such as D-cell batteries or solar panels and things like that. Technology in many ways is inferior to magic, so I would recommend that you not be scared to use it in your game. In fact, the earliest editions of Dungeons and Dragons involved technology in Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, for instance, one of the earliest adventures. So to those people who think that spaceships and things in Dungeons and Dragons ruin it, I think that's a limitation of your imagination and technical skill more than it is a limitation of the game itself. But everyone is welcome to their opinion, of course. That's simply mine. So every building in Sigil is created of stone or iron, and these are cheaper than wood. Wood, of course, can burn, it can break down, it can rot, and it also forms a home for vermin, and it forms a material that the roots of quite a nasty vine can grow in. So yeah, the importation of goods that you can build with are an important trade aspect of Sigil, as opposed to those being conjured up by a spell singer who can create material goods. So even with the commonality of these building materials, the cases of higher-ups are still constructed using important stones and metals from somewhere else in the plains. Gehennan limestone, marble from Mount Celestia, bloodstone from the abyss. These are all popular items of construction for rich people. Similarly, the most prominent use of iron makes this material the most common material for decorations. So a lot of Sigil's buildings, particularly the larger important buildings, are decorated with large menacing blades that jut from every rooftop or windowsill. It's a theme that's common to the city. So gates and things like that will have quite nasty projections and things above them. And a lattice work of bladed designs is one of the more common themes that you'll find there. So blades they're sharp, and their cleanliness and ability to keep pigeons and animals from perching on ledges and things is important. So most residences in Sigil are built around residences are built in around this internal courtyard, so access to the buildings is only available through the courtyard, and access to the courtyard is blocked off by a narrow alleyway or a gate or portcullis. And the public housing keeps the courtyards open to any comers, although privately owned buildings tend to close the gates at night and keep the owners or keep anyone other than the owners away, particularly when the owners aren't there. And these courtyards enforce a greater privacy, allowing a little internal space outdoors for the homeowners that isn't basically crowded streets and things, because there's no real open courtyards and things like that. There's no gardens or public parks and things. There's slag pits and things like that, which are kind of places where just nobody wants to be. But there's no, the parks and things like that are built for a purpose and they're owned by people. There's no public land per se. So, yeah. Some import dirt and turn the courtyards into small walled-off gardens, as I said. During times of riot or public distress, it's common for bystanders to run into the nearest courtyard for safety. Maybe a good idea or not. And, of course, the reasons that people have for coming to Sigil are as varied as the people themselves who are in Sigil. This can range from pit fiends and solars to kobolds and goblins. There's all sorts of people from all different realms of existence that exist there. So, yeah, we're going to be coming back to Sigil as we explore different realms of existence, and I'll keep coming back to Sigil and explaining a little bit more about it, talking about the different factions, the faction war, the Krieg, the cant and the language of it, the governance, and also things that you can find there and buy there, and some ideas for plots and things of how you would run an adventure through Sigil, which I quite often do. It's one of my favourite locations for running games, so I've got a bit of familiarity with it. I'll put a list of links underneath this video that you can read and get a bit of information about Sigil. This is stuff that's commonly available to anybody with an internet connection, and I recommend having a look through, and if there's anything in particular about Sigil that you want me to cover next, for sure let me know. Otherwise, we're going to be going to places bright and pretty in the video after the next one, but our next video is going to be somewhere more twilight and mysterious, and yeah, I look forward to bringing them to you as regularly as possible. Thanks for listening, everybody. I'll catch you again soon. This is AJ, the Mighty Glue Stick Explorers, signing off.